Thank you, everyone. I am here to talk about the planet. You heard an exciting talk about the universe, the cosmology, the astrophysics. It was absolutely fascinating. But in this whole universe, there is a tiny dot, and that is the planet Earth. The Greeks call it Gaia. We call it Dharani, Dharitri, Prithibhi, and very interestingly, another name in Bengali, Sarbangshaha, an entity which tolerates everything. Turns out that was not quite true. Human race, when it evolved, started to treat the earth as though it will tolerate everything. But a time has come when this Sarbangshaha planet, the earth, the place where we live, the place where we evolved, the cosmic dust that became our home and contains in our body, as you heard before, all the elements that are produced in the universe. That planet is what I want to talk about. I am here in Rajshahi, beautiful Rajshahi, but the talk is not about Rajshahi. The talk is not about Bangladesh or Asia. The talk is about the planet. So what is it that I want to say about the planet? On the left side of the slides, you can see the kind of crops that used to be in the planet about 20,000 years ago, when the human species had evolved by then into the current form, and they became conscious at some point. We talked about consciousness. Out of this cosmic nothingness, out of the random collision of the molecules, there arose in the human brain, we call it mind, but it is nothing but the brain. In the brain, cells started to interact, and out of it, what we call our consciousness, also known as a feeling of what happens. So if you are sad, if you are happy, we all know inside what it means. The feeling of what happens. That kind of consciousness came to human species at a certain point, and they looked around them, and the religious books talks about it. Because in religious books say, the sun rose and the human beings thought sun was the God, and the sun set, and they knew that sun was not the God, and so on and so forth. So the earliest human consciousness are contained in fact in the religious books. And we all carry in us in different form that we call spirituality. The other thing people looked around, when they looked around them, they found that plants had evolved. The nature, as we call it, trees had evolved, rivers were there. So suddenly the human race looked around and said, oh my God, we are in this paradise. And that kind of idea of nature being paradise is now also contained in the religious text and so many other ancient texts. One particular issue of that nature, one particular part of the nature I want to talk about, which is our crop plants. And I want to go further and say the crop plants that feed us are vitally linked with the concept of food security. Turns out the kind of agriculture, the kind of looking after the nature or not looking after the nature that we have done has now given rise to the big problem that we call climate change. So we evolved on this planet Earth. We became the custodian of it, and religious books say that. In Quran it says, وَإِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. The God, Allah, decided that He is going to send custodians, Khalifa, to the earth. Earth is the only name of the planets that is not named after the god and goddesses. It's very close. The earth, Arabic word, and the English word earth are very similar. In Hebrew it says eretz, land, earth. In this, the crops had evolved, and we looked into them, and some of them are shown on the left side, the perennial crop. So here I want to introduce two concepts. One is the crop that grows eternally. We call them perennial, such as Napier grass as shown here. And the cousin of Napier grass is what we call rice, is shown on the right. So when human beings started to, about 15, 20,000 years ago, they started domesticate them. Mainly women did it. They used to go around foraging. So before domestication, we used to call hunter-gatherer or foragers. Women would go around collecting seed. The whole day they would collect it, bring it back to their caves, and smash them with mortar and pestle, and that was a little bit of food that they had. That went on for hundreds and thousands of years. And out of that journey, innovation came into the mega scientists. No one knows their name. I presume they're female scientists who noticed that in that little tiny seed that they were collecting, some seed were bigger. So they got the bigger seed and they started to grow them around where they were living instead of going around. This went on for thousands of years. So there are two major events that took place that women scientists did. One is that they looked for bigger seed, inadvertently perhaps, or I think deliberately. And they also looked for crops that were not shattering away, because old perennial crops, they all shatter away. You cannot harvest it. So they got larger seed. They removed the shattering through their selection process. They looked for plants that were not shattering. And very soon they found that where they were living, these plants were growing. And they didn't have to go around looking for them. And then suddenly this innovation was there, and agriculture was born. But unknown to them, when they selected for crops in this particular way, they were also making them seasonal. They wanted to have the harvest come very quickly. They want to have the harvest in a defined period so they can all collect it and have the big festivity. So suddenly you see a kind of rudimentary science was being born, what we later would be called natural science, science of the nature. So everything was now in that primitive society, 15, 20, 30, nobody knows exactly when, 1,000 years ago, in tropical Asia, in the Fertile Crescent, in the South America, three major crops, rice, wheat, and corn was being domesticated, defined by the people so that they all can harvest in a particular time. All could be harvested and kept in the granary, and suddenly somebody had property. Suddenly somebody had a big silo. So to protect the silo, they got the soldiers, and a kind of a rudimentary capitalism was born. But without realizing, when they did that, when they made perennial crops seasonal for their benefit, they did not look under the soil because they had no reason to. But today we know they were selecting for smaller roots. And as you can see, the larger root on the left, smaller root on the right. Without realizing, we were initiating steps that would become major issues later, such as now that we have depleted the soil of large root-containing plants, and therefore we have depleted the soil and set in motion the process that we call degeneration of the soil, or the climate change issues that are shown up at the moment. So what to do about it? And here is what I did. So I came back. I have been away for 45 years. About 25 years ago, I came back, and you can see my village here. And I set in motion some experiments to reverse this damage in order to save the earth, so to speak. So my work became climate mitigation-centered work, but also to have massive food security gain as well. I wanted to combine the both, kind of have my cake and eat it too. So I started this series of experiments in the village, away from the Western world, away from the academic institution, away from the research laboratories, because I had the idea that just like ordinary people around the world domesticated the crop, in order to de-domesticate them for the benefit of the earth, I wanted to do it in a large village. And you can see the picture of my village, Kanihati, in the broader district of Sylhet. And I conjured in my mind an image that I will make rice 5 harvest. Just like the ancient people took the perennial rice and made it mono-harvest and mono-seasonal, I wanted to reverse the trend and make it perennial. And then I knew intellectually from my knowledge that if I did that, I would also make the root larger. So Panchbrihi, this is the symbol. This has become very familiar in the country now. I hope it will spread more and we can do it in Rajshahi as well in future. And on the left is the genetic screen of what I did. I kind of de-domesticated rice. I took the rice, which is single season, single harvest, and converted it into multi-harvest by a series of experiment, breeding and selection, Mendelian selection, and the breeding in the conventional sense. No genetically modified, nothing. And this is the area where I did it. You can see the beautiful drone footage, a lot of water everywhere, and my little patch is shown in the spot that you can see. Again, I want to emphasize that historically crops were perennial, they were made seasonal. Without realizing, human species didn't realize it, or they would not have understood the significance. Roots were made smaller. We initiated an experiment in a village, got all our farmers together, and we made rice perennial. Not completely perennial yet, but we will make it perennial. This is some science shown that in order to make them perennial, we discovered a biological spray, again, with the help of farmers, that emphasizes or strengthens the perenniality. We also discovered a new phenomenon where yield is very high in the first harvest, goes down a bit in the second harvest, and then goes up again in the third harvest. These are all new biology, and because we have just gotten the variety, we don't know the detail inside, but in due course, we will find the detail of that. All this is shown here in a statistically significant way. You can see on the left that farmers' variety have very tiny seed, and our varieties on the right, very tiny root, and our varieties on the right have massive roots. So just like we had predicted when we made them multi-harvest, when we made them kind of perennial, semi-perennial, we also increased the root, strengthening our original assumption that during the early domestication, root were reduced. We have now gone into wheat, not just rice alone, and in fact, other crops that we are working in the same way. We want to make every crop multi-harvest. We don't want to stop with rice because there are so many other crops, important crops, beans, and so on. One by one, we are applying our method to make them multi-harvest. So where do we go from now? We want to go around the 87,000 villages, and beyond Bangladesh, we want to go to Southeast Asia. We want to go to the tropics, Asia, Africa, Latin America, tropics of the world, where the crops were domesticated originally. We want to take all our crops in future with the help of our farmers. We have formed organization, we have formed partnership, and this is our journey that has just begun. And we have been rewarded because of my work in Australia in the Western world with certain patents in related work, not exactly this work, but we want to put and our story was also on the cover of Nature in another project, but we want to take this journey all over the world as a symbol of what Bangladesh can do in science and climate mitigation. Thank you very much.